of spies hide out in every corner. They can't touch you, no, 'cause they're just spies. They're just spies. They're just spies. They're just spies. They're just spies.
One way or another, I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna get you. One way or another, I'm gonna win you. I'm gonna get you. One way or another, I'm gonna see you. I wanna meet you. One day, maybe next week, I'm gonna meet you. I'll meet you. I will drive past your house, and if the lights are all down, I'll see who's around. One way or another, I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna get you. One way or another, I'm gonna win you. I'll get you. One way or another, I'm gonna see you. I'm gonna meet you.
That song you'll see when the lights on, and then when you're ready.
I'm gonna meet you. I'll meet you. And if the lights are all out, I'll follow your bus downtown. See who's hanging out.
'cause you're my rock star in between the sets. Eyeliner and cigarettes. Shadow is burnt, yellow dancing return. My lashes are dry, purple teardrops I cry. It don't have a price. Loving you is cherry pie. 'Cause you know that, baby, I'm your biggest fan. I'll follow you until you love me. Paparazzi. Baby, there's no other superstar. You know that I'll be your paparazzi. Promise I'll be kind, but I won't stop until that boy is mine. Baby, you'll be famous, chase you down until you love me. Paparazzi, real good. We dance in the studio, snap, that shit on the radio. Don't stop for anyone. We'll plastic, but we still have fun. I'm your biggest fan. I'll follow you until you love me. Paparazzi. Baby, there's no other superstar. You know that I'll be your paparazzi. Promise I'll be kind, but I won't stop until that boy is mine. Baby, you'll be famous, chase you down until you love me. Paparazzi.
All right, I think we have everyone here today, so I just want to say hello. I'm Mike Shapiro, the Chief Privacy Officer of the County of Santa Clara, and I would like to welcome everyone to our second annual Data Privacy Day. We have a wonderful event lined up for you today, and after I finish talking for a few minutes, we'll get the show started with our expert panelists who know a thing or two about our theme this year on elections, privacy, and the public trust. After our conversation, we'll open up the questions for the audience. Then one of our board supervisors, Joe Samidian, will provide closing remarks. And then I've decided to take the mic one last time just to thank everyone, but really so Joe won't have to be the last person between you and lunch, which will be right outside after the event. We also have our privacy team staff here to assist you, and also ROV staff for any voting questions that you may have. So I'd like to start off by saying that I think all of us know the importance of elections and the need to get it right. Today, more than ever, we are seeing our systems of election, the details of our lives, and our democracy being impacted in new and innovative ways, sometimes for our benefit, sometimes not. How we respond and what we need to do to protect what is most important to us will define the way elections are fought and won, the elected officials who get into office, and the nation we live in. Many of you may be here because you have a variety of reasons and interests that you'd like to learn about here today. And part of what we want to do at the county is to reach out to residents so that they understand the voting process and where to get legitimate election information. And our ROV office supports that effort. At the Privacy Office, we're going to be launching our Privacy Center of Excellence this year and bring voices from government, academia, business, and the public to discuss and develop best practices in privacy, which will cover a range of topics, from consumer privacy and tech industry to law and policy, and of course, the privacy issues affecting our voters. Now, some of you may be here for various reasons. You might be interested in learning more about the role of technology as it impacts privacy in our elections, or you may simply just be concerned that your vote will count. We're going to talk about just how important all this is, along with the discussions about the forces at play that are trying to influence you and our elections, and what we as voters can do to make sure we are making informed decisions, that we can identify false information, and feel confident that when we vote, our vote counts. So we have a wonderful panel of experts today, right behind me here, who will share their knowledge and experience with us on these issues. And hopefully by the end, we'll have a better understanding of our election system and what we can do to make sure that the integrity of that system is sound and lasting. So right now, I'd like to introduce our moderator and panelists today. So over here, Alicia McDonald, our moderator, is an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University and a fellow at Stanford Center for Internet and Technology. She focuses on the public policy issues of internet privacy, user expectations for do not track, behavioral economics and mental models of privacy, and the efficacy of industry self-regulation. She co-chaired and remains active in the WC3's Tracking Protection Working Group, an ongoing effort to establish international standards for a do not track mechanism that users can enable to request enhanced privacy online. Alicia's decade of experience working in software startups adds a practical focus to her academic work, and she was a senior privacy researcher for Mozilla while working for CIS as a resident fellow. Her research findings have been featured in media outlets such as the Washington Post, Ars Technica, and Free Press's Media Minute. She has presented in testimony to the California Assembly and contributed to testimony before the United States Senate and the Federal Trade Commission. Gail Pellerin is County Clerk, Registrar of Voters for Santa Cruz County, California. Gail was appointed to the position in July 2004 after serving as the county's elections manager since 1993 and was elected to her third four-year term in 2018. She has more than 34 years of experience in public service. Congratulations, by the way. She spent 7 of those years working for the state legislature in Sacramento and 26 years serving as a primary elections official in Santa Cruz County. Gail served as president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials from 2010 to 2012, has served on the Secretary of State's Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee since 2006, and has been a member of the Future of California Elections since 2011. She has authored several election guidebooks to assist voters in navigating through various election procedures, including initiatives, recalls, and referendums. We also have Barbara Simons with us. She is a former president of the Association of Computing Machinery, the nation's largest educational and scientific computing society. She's the only woman to have received the Distinguished Engineering Alumni Award from the College of Engineering of UC Berkeley, where she earned her PhD in computer science. A fellow of ACM and the American Association for Advancement of Science, she has received the Computing Research Association Distinguished Service Award and the Electronic Frontier Foundation Pioneer Award. An expert on electronic voting, she published Broken Ballots, Will Your Vote Count?, a book on voting machines co-authored with Douglas Jones. She has also been on the Board of Advisors of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission since 2008, and I can't believe I mentioned all of those accomplishments in just that one piece. Very impressive. We have Kim Alexander, who's a president and founder of the California Voter Foundation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization established in 1994 and dedicated to improving the voting process to better serve voters. CVF is an organization is a longtime leader in advancing the responsible use of technology in the democratic process by pioneering online voter education, online campaign finance disclosure, and voter-verified paper ballot records and auditing requirements for computerized voting systems. Current priorities include supporting Californians' right to equal treatment and protection in the voting process, reducing the vote-by-mail ballot rejection rate, increasing funding for election administration, and advancing voting system security and meaningful auditing of ballots in California and nationwide. So with that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Alicia, to get the conversation started. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out and being here and being interested in this really interesting set of topics. Right now, democracies are under challenge. We've seen that famously with Brexit. We've seen that famously with our last presidential election and a variety of other elections as well across the globe. The openness of our societies and the richness of the data that we're using for advertising and other purposes are being reused and weaponized against the notion of having a fair election. So we'll get into some of those issues today. And we have a fantastic panel. I'm really excited to be here. So I just want to ask you all in turn, we'll just go down. What was your path to come to working on elections and privacy and cybersecurity issues? What got you to today?
Sure. So obviously, I'm here today because I hosted the event, but really my background has been more consistently in information privacy and security. I originally got started years ago as a software engineer and sort of fell into information security at that time. It's still at a moment in our time, very recent history it seems like, but actually quite a while in the whole scheme of things, to where information security was very much in its infancy. A lot of people weren't thinking about those issues. You know, the internet was still something that was relatively immature. People really weren't thinking too much about how to protect data online, and so from there I started thinking beyond systems. What do we need to think about data? And then I started to get more involved in the privacy field. From there, I ended up going to grad school, and I focused my efforts on information privacy there. I wrote my thesis on the online privacy disconnect between the United States and European Union. And at that time, it was with the Data Protection Directive, which is obsolete at this point, thanks to the Global Data Protection Regulation, but that's okay. So at the time, though, very relevant. And so that really sort of piqued my interest as I started doing more and more research into the background and the theory of privacy to sort of match my practice in it. And so from there, just got involved in privacy consulting work. So I did a lot of work in federal government privacy around Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia, Maryland. And so from there, I ended up doing a little bit of state government work and commercial work. And it's been really fascinating, just get a wide range of experiences across different client environments. The different types of departments that you work with have very different privacy issues. And they have very different risks that are associated with that. And so I think it really helped sort of prepare me to come to the county and to learn a little bit more sort of what the county does here, and not only our voting systems, but also just the range of departments and the types of data that they deal with. And so here, working with our registrar of voters and having a little bit of background in election security, I thought it was fascinating that we have the opportunity to come here today and to have people, you know, like our registrar of voters who's here, our chief information security officer who's here, myself as chief privacy officer, and many others in the room here today on our panel, to really have an opportunity to share our experiences and discuss what we need to do to make sure that our elections today and also in the future are done safely, with integrity, and that we can actually believe that when we cast a vote that it'll be counted correctly.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you. There. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you all today in San Jose. It's a fun question to answer to get the morning started. I had to kind of think about that path. For me, it really started at age 7 when my dad ran for city council in Culver City, and my job that night was to literally write the vote count down on the chalkboard in the garage at our election night party while someone was on the phone with the city clerk's office hollering to me what the vote count was. And it was an open seat contest for 2 seats and 12 candidates, and my dad surprisingly won. He was a dark horse candidate, and it was very exciting, and he walked door to door. And so I grew up in local government in a household that was very engaged and feeling very satisfied with the voting process from a very young age because of that experience. And then later on, as a college student, actually after I got out of college, I was working in Sacramento, and I was working for California Common Cause, and I had been a Senate fellow, and I'd gotten my degrees in political science and philosophy, and I was voting for maybe the second time, and I had to vote on the Board of Equalization, and I thought, I don't know what the Board of Equalization does, and I thought, well, I guess everybody else knows, and I'm just ignorant. And then I thought about that a little bit more and was like, you know, I may be young, but I have a college degree, I'm working in Sacramento, I'm working for a nonprofit that works in government and politics, and if I don't know what I'm doing when I'm voting, what are the chances that other people are? And so I started to learn about the internet in the early 1990s and realized that this could be a great tool for helping people get informed. And so that was some of the very early work that I did through the California Voter Foundation. And then later on, what brought me into the cybersecurity side of it, realizing that it's not all peaches and cream online, was being asked to serve on the Secretary of State's Internet Voting Task Force in 1999. And I went into it thinking, oh, we could vote online, we just have to figure out how. And I really did not understand anything at that point about election administration, about what was going on behind the scenes with election security. And I've spent the last 20 years learning all about that. And it's an infinite amount to know, but long story short, I do not think online voting is a good idea. I think it's still very far away from being feasible. But I find it very interesting to be involved in this issue area because it is always changing. There are always new challenges, and I'm really delighted to be here and talk about those with you today. Thanks.
Good morning. So I was raised by very conservative parents, and my father actually did not believe women should go to college. So I worked and paid my way through college, and I studied journalism and political science, and I really came into my own and my own voice during that time. And my first job out of college was in journalism, covering government, and I realized I was too opinionated to stay in journalism. So I started working for a state assembly member, worked my way up to Sacramento, worked for Assembly Speaker Willie Brown for a number of years. Remembered with the transition from paper to computers at the state assembly, and worked with that and the security of the computers then. And then I ended up getting married, moved to Santa Cruz County, and got a job as the elections manager. And our first voting system was a data vote, where when the ballots were counted through the machines, going through like an IBM sort of count, all this stuff was coming out. I'm like, what is that? And that's the chads that were flying out as the ballots were being counted. And I said, oh no, we're not sticking with this. We're going to convert to a mark a vote system where it's actually a pen and a paper where people mark their choices. So I got rid of chads long before the Florida incident. And then when, the internet came of age, and, we were going to do a website, and my website was santa-cruz.ca.us/. I'm like, whoa. I cannot say that to people and have them remember that. That's insane. So I came up with votescount.com as our website. And at the time, I thought COM stood for computer. So to this day, that is our website, votescount.com. People try to buy it from me all the time, but I will not sell it. And I think as we started posting election results on the website, I actually have a clip art of a naked woman from the first time Secretary of State had results on the internet, where someone hacked in and did that, and things are much more advanced now. So, I've just learned a lot over the years. I'm from a small county. We're a little Mayberry still in Santa Cruz County, for those of you who are old enough to watch that show. So I've learned a lot in this journey, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but I worry about it all the time. And, I'm just have a great information services department that I meet with weekly, and my IT guy on staff is a former security person in the military. So, and I belong to a number of state and federal organizations to stay on the cutting edge of security. And I work with a great team of elections officials in the state of California, and it's great to see Shannon Boucher here. You guys are so lucky to have her. She's one of the best, and Linda Toulette. So just give a shout out to them, and you're in good hands here in Santa Clara. So thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Barbara Simons, and I want to thank Mike and the county, Santa Clara County, for putting this on. This is an important event to be holding, so thank you. I should also mention I am board chair of Verified Voting, which is where you got the bio from, I think. And but I'm not speaking for Verified Voting or for any other organization that I'm involved with, so my comments are just going to be my own. I got involved with this back in 1999 also, when I was also on a panel looking at internet voting, which had been formed at the request of President Clinton. And I had the same experience as you, Kim. I went in thinking, cool idea. Fortunately, there were people on the panel who were more knowledgeable about computer security than I was at the time, and they very quickly disabused me of that idea. And in fact, we did produce a report. It came out in 2000. And it recommended against internet voting. And like Kim, I remain convinced to this day that it's still a bad idea. By the way, including blockchain voting, which is a kind of internet voting. So after that, I sort of had a bit of a hiatus until I got sucked back into this again. And that was in 2002, 2003, when the Help America Vote Act was passed back in 2002, making almost $4 billion, with a B, dollars, available to purchase new, wonderful voting systems to replace these chads that Florida had made so infamous. And there was a bit of a golden rush mentality. Everybody wanted to buy them. This was money from the feds. And of course, quite understandably, election officials wanted to be able to show their voters that they had the newest and the best stuff, which makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, there were no good standards at the time. There was no security testing at the time. These machines came to market, and many of them were paperless. And as a computer scientist, I was just appalled, as were many of my colleagues. And did we meet in 2003 here? So Kim and I met here in 2003 when we showed up to fight the purchase of paperless. The DRE stands for Direct Recording Electronics, so these touchscreen machines that store the information in the memory of the computer, which means who knows if what you saw on the screen is what went into the memory, because those are different components. It could be entirely different. So we showed up to fight it. And remember, there was a whole row of computer scientists, PhDs, and Kim was there, and we spoke out against. In fact, NPR came to this. It really got national attention, and we lost. We lost 2-3, unfortunately, but we actually saved some money for Santa Clara County because, as a compromise, they put into the contract that if the state ever required paper, that the vendor would have to cover the cost of the upgrade. And the state did require paper under I think Secretary of State Shelley. I believe that was who did it. And then Santa Clara just went to the vendor and said, which I believe was Sequoia, okay, Sequoia, you pay up. So ever since then, I've been, I guess, somewhat obsessed by this topic. I'm shocked that I and Kim and many of us have been doing this work for almost 2 decades. We should have we should have secure voting systems now. And the fact that we don't is a bit of a national scandal, in my opinion. So I'll stop there.
That's a great set of opening remarks. Barbara, if you could keep your mic just a tiny bit further away, that'll help. Thank you. And if we could just also pick up the pace. Now that we know who you are, we're going to go through kind of lightning round next. Let's get in our time machine and go back to December 2016. From your professional roles, your perspective there, what do you remember about the elections, and what were some of your thoughts about what had just happened? And in fact, if you could even tell us a little bit more of what you saw happen, but do it quickly. Thanks.
So I think what was fascinating about the 2016 election is the use of disinformation campaigns. And we could talk about that a little bit more in depth later. But I think that was really the biggest take from that, was that it really caught a lot of people flat-footed, including a lot of social media companies that didn't realize that their platforms were being used in this way and didn't quite understand what kind of responsibility that they had, if any. And so I think that was one of the huge aspects of 2016 that I think still affects us today, and that we certainly have to pay very much attention to on how we deal with that going forward.
I think one of my biggest struggles and takeaways from 2016 as an advocate for election security is just the ongoing challenge that we face trying to walk this fine line between wanting voters to be confident. We want people to vote. We don't want to undermine people's desire to vote by talking about election security challenges. At the same time, we want to talk about those challenges because we need them to be addressed. And so I felt that many times in my career, but never as intensely as I did in 2016. And I remember being at a conference in Portland the following spring, talking to somebody about the election, and he said, you know, oh, I didn't bother to vote. Why should I vote? The Russians are deciding who's winning anyway. And, you know, I said to him, like, they win when you say that, you know, that's feeding right into it. So I'm always looking for advice about how to walk that line. I think it's something a lot of us in this field really struggle with.
So in our office, every election, we take a pool on turnout, and I always put my dollar on 100%. And I actually won once. There were only 14 voters, but I won. And I think it's difficult to count uncast ballots. And there were clearly millions of people who did not vote in 2016. And actually, the figure I have is 42% of eligible voters decided not to participate, either because they couldn't or they didn't want to. And there were a lot of voter suppression tactics being used by various states. So I believe the cure for this, in addition to what they're saying as far as the security of our systems, is the cure for this is more democracy, not less.
And just a quick comment. I've been working on security of voting systems for a long time. I never, before 2016, never would have suggested that our elections might be attacked by a nation state, an enemy nation state. After 2016, it doesn't seem very far-fetched, especially given all the warnings that we've been getting from the intelligence community. So I'm very concerned. And I share everybody else's desire not to turn people off, because the surefire way to have your vote undermined is not to vote.
So yeah, hitting really important topics there. Disinformation, social media, voter suppression, nation-state attacks, which blew my mind too, right? That was just not a thing that I foresaw. I saw a lot of other things, Chicago-style voting, but I didn't think we were going to be attacked by Russia. So now that we've seen all of that, we've gone through this, here we are in 2020. What are you doing this year for elections? What are your organizations all doing? And this time we'll start from Barbara and move back toward Mike.
Well, Verified Voting is working on trying to get post-election ballot audits where there are paper ballots. And the gold standard of these audits is called risk-limiting audits. It uses statistics to basically minimize the number of ballots you have to examine, assuming that the declared results are correct. If you start finding problems, you're going to look at more and more ballots until ultimately you may do a total manual recount. I should just add quickly, California has had a 1% manual recount law since 1965. It was, I think, the first in the country to have such a law, and it was groundbreaking at the time. But now we understand how to do it better, because 1% may be too little or too much, depending on how close the race is and how much confidence you want in the result.
So we are implementing a new voting system in this election. It is all paper-based, and people are using the accessible device as a tablet that actually prints a piece of paper that has the votes listed on there, so the voter can see that and verify it before it goes into the ballot box. We did work closely with the Department of Homeland Security to have our systems tested, and we passed. There were no known vulnerabilities identified. We belong to the different state and multi-state advisory committees and get information from them, work closely with the Secretary of State's office. I think information sharing has improved tremendously among these organizations, and I think that's strengthened our state and local election cybersecurity efforts. And you know, I do believe in 2016 and 2018 that the Russians' primary efforts involved disinformation and not really manipulation of voting systems or election systems. I think those were pretty rare incidents that occurred, but really just the spread of disinformation was huge and frightening.
I also am working on the post-election audit issue. California Voter Foundation has been involved in the risk-limiting audit regulations that have been developed over the past year with the Secretary of State. And we also are always engaged in voter education. Our website, calvoter.org, is home to the California Online Voter Guide. So we serve as a repository of reliable information and help voters find reliable information through our website. One of the big voter education pieces that we're focused on this year, as we were in the last election cycle, is the implementation of the Voters' Choice Act, which is happening here in Santa Clara County. Shannon and her staff are here to help answer questions. I just want to point out that there's some great swag and the table outside, including these nice little hand fans. There might not be that many of them, but I hope you will grab these and help get the word out in the county, because people need to know that voting is changing in Santa Clara, changed in my county, replacing polling places with vote centers. There are fewer of them, but they're open more days, and you can do more things at them. Everybody in your county is going to be mailed a vote-by-mail ballot for the first time, which is a great convenience, and you have a number of ways to return it. You can return it by mail, you can return it at a drop-off location, or you can go to a vote center and vote a ballot there on an accessible device that will produce a printed paper ballot as well. So there's a lot of changes happening for voters in California, and we're trying to help them sort those out. And one of the specific issues that we're working on is trying to reduce the rejected ballot rate in California. What we've seen is, with this increasing number of ballots being cast as vote-by-mail ballots, those ballots are all put inside envelopes that bear the voter's signature that have to be verified before they're counted. And so it's really, as my friend Jack Mahoney, who's here from Silicon Valley Community Foundation, said to me when we first started talking about this, has shifted the burden of getting it right when you vote from the poll worker to the voter. The voter's got to make sure that they're filling out not just the ballot properly, but the envelope, getting it in on time. So it's really important that we educate people about these changes and the importance of the signature on the envelope, not forgetting to sign it, getting it in on time. These are the reasons why some vote-by-mail ballots get rejected. It's not a huge percentage, but it's a significant number that are getting rejected in many counties. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit more about how to help people get it right when they vote by mail. So thanks.
Yeah, and I would have to say that thanks for those comments. Here in the county, we are, as she said, we're implementing a new election system. And so I think it's really that public outreach, because it is something new, and sometimes that's a little scary, or people are just unsure. What is the difference between a vote center and a polling place? How does that affect them? And so it's really letting them know sort of the new ways that they can vote, and that sometimes that can be a little bit more convenient, but they certainly, we want to try to educate them on what that means and what they can do to make sure that they register appropriately and then show up to vote. So I would also have to say that informing voters, again, public outreach, about what are the legitimate sources to get election information. There's been sort of a huge range out there of bad actors that want to try to dupe people into believing something that isn't. So, for example, there have been phony websites out there that look like the real thing. They might be just one letter off in the web address, but it looks legitimate, and a lot of people don't quite check that out. So people go to that site and they end up, deciding, well, let me see, where should my vote center be? And they're told incorrect information. They don't know it. They're given sample ballots and it has information that's incorrect. Or it shows everything perfectly on a sample ballot and the date is wrong. So I think providing our voters with legitimate sources of information is going to be extremely important, especially as we're starting to see, such efforts materialize from foreign interference and from other actors that want to try to influence this election. I think we're going to see more of it, not less of it, unless we do something to try to counteract that.
That gets into all sorts of interesting issues with how do you do takedown. Gail, you had something you wanted to respond to.
I just want to say one thing that's very confusing about this presidential primary is the crossover voting. If for voters who are registered with no party preference or independent or declined to state or nonpartisan, they actually get a choice to vote a party ballot if that party has authorized them to cross over and vote that ballot. So the Democratic Party allows it, American Independent, and Libertarian. And for all the voters that are voting by mail, you needed to let your registrar know which ballot you wanted. Otherwise, they're mailing you a ballot without the office of president on there. But no more tears about getting the wrong ballot, because you can always get a second ballot, easy enough. The vote centers that you have in Santa Clara with us, we're going to do some same-day voter registration centers early as well. But also with California now, again, expanding democracy, making voting more accessible, we have same-day voter registration at the polling sites. So if a voter shows up with, the wrong ballot they got in the mail, they can easily get the correct ballot that they want, either by re-registering, because if you want to vote Republican, you have to be registered Republican. If you want to vote Green, be registered Green. If you want to vote Peace and Freedom, be registered with that party. But for the other, and so it just gets a little confusing for voters. So that information's been a top priority to get that clear direction out there for voters.
I just want to add to that, be sure to bring your ballot with you if you want to get a ballot at the polling place.
Not necessarily. So we are actually doing what I think Shasta may have started, where we're having a hotline on Election Day. So if a vote-by-mail voter shows up without their ballot, in the past, they would have had to vote provisionally, because we had to make sure we didn't get that vote-by-mail ballot back before we, count their vote. Now we have a hotline going on, so the poll worker can call, we can look up Barbara, we can see you have not returned your vote-by-mail ballot, we'll then void it right then on the computer system, and then give the voter a regular ballot. So I believe a lot of counties are doing that. And I think with vote centers, you guys just are connected and can do that as well.
Go Santa Cruz. That sounds awesome.
Just to be clear, though, it's not uniform in all 58 counties. This is one of the things that makes it really confusing to be a California voter. If you're not in a vote center county, or you don't have a registrar of voters like Gail or Shasta's registrar, who happens to be our chair of our board, they're the two sort of registrars who go above and beyond, and other registrars may not have the resources or the desire to set up the kinds of systems that they do. So fortunately for you in Santa Clara County, because you have the Voters' Choice Act going into place, your vote centers will all be networked with the county election office. If you show up at a vote center and you don't have the ballot that they issued, they'll issue you a new one right there. They'll cancel the one that was issued to you. So you may have 2 ballots, but only one of them will be considered a valid ballot. The one that it's replacing is voided.
So all these details matter, right? And you can get into them, and the bottom line is it's local. You need to know what your county does, and that there's a lot of change, right? So,
But even if you have to vote provisionally, those votes do count, and they count during the canvass. So,
Yep. So awesome. The fun thing about this topic, right, is I'm a geek. I love getting into all of the details, and there are a lot of them. The hard thing is that most voters don't want to have to be educated on it. Right? So that's one of the challenges. We've talked a lot about risk communication. We've talked about security. Let's move a little bit more to privacy and some tension that we have going on here, since this is a really big privacy event today. During Bush v. Gore, I started getting intrigued by what can we do with statistics to figure out what did or didn't happen county by county in Florida. So Florida passed a law to keep more voting information more secret, keep it away from journalists, keep it away from, as I was at that point, an academic. We have this tension. There are people who want data about who voted when, what do they tend to vote, which primaries. Of course, the parties want information. And we also have not only the campaigns and the PACs, but election administrators. We just heard about some fantastic things that can happen that make people's lives better if there's data. And yet, being able to vote anonymously is an important part of being able to keep a democracy. If you can't vote anonymously, you almost certainly are going to have issues with bribery, right? So we've pioneered that, we've found that out, here we are, we're doing it from the start in the US if we're going to do this anonymously. How do we square the notion of people want privacy about their voting, and yet there are these organizations with very legitimate needs for the data? So I would love to hear your thoughts. This time we'll start with Mike and roll back down.
Sure. What I think is fascinating about it is that unlike previous years or previous election cycles, we're seeing the use of social media and data aggregators more and more now than we have in the past. And they're doing it in new ways. So when political parties, when candidates, when PACs want to get information, they no longer just have to go to government sources, which they can still do, and they most definitely do that. But they also have other avenues that they can get. And it's not just sort of your common online directories. So they have a whole host of ways in which they can try to target users, right? Try to target all of you. And so now just clicking on a like on a news article, clicking on a like on a product that you decided to buy, for example, can start to build a profile on you. And so basically this type of data creates a certain value, right? It creates a certain profit to those folks. And as they start to build out a profile on you, the idea is that sometimes you've heard the saying that they know more about you than you do, or your tendencies and your likenesses. And so what I think is going to be really challenging going forward is how do we provide some of that sense of at least control, or at least some sense of kind of restrictions on this type of activity? You know, right now, like social media data breaches such as the Facebook Cambridge Analytica one, you know, basically even if you were a user and you had your privacy settings set in a certain way, if you had a friend that took that survey, you could have still had your information breached. And so that's really alarming to me, being a privacy professional, that even if you were very privacy forward and upfront, that it could still be breached. And what was also fascinating about it is that in the whole scheme of things, it wasn't that the laws were broken, it's that Facebook's own privacy policy was broken, and that was the discussion point. And so I think there's certainly a problem with sort of lack of law and policy to back up the innovation that's taking place today. And I think we need to get to a better place in understanding how data is used and try to wrap around at least some sense of policy and law around that. And until we get there, I think we're going to start seeing more and more micro-targeting of people and trying to get to their information from multiple sources, not just one or two, to try to develop more strict profiles and to be able to target people in ways that we haven't seen quite yet. And it's even more of a concern when we're not just looking domestically, but when we're looking at foreign governments that are trying to influence that, and how they can actually influence elections into the future in ways that we may not know yet. And so I think we need to sort of keep our eyes open and start looking for those new ways that voters might be targeted as well.
This is an issue that I've worked on over a number of years. California Voter Foundation back in 2004 published the first study ever done on voter data privacy called Voter Privacy in the Digital Age. And we surveyed all 50 states' voter registration data gathering requirements, what's required when you register to vote, and then dissemination of that data, who's allowed to use it and what information is disseminated. We did find that sensitive information like driver's license and social security numbers are redacted, so that information isn't going out. Some states allow commercial use of voter data. California, fortunately, is not one of them. We allow four categories of use: academic, as was mentioned, media, political campaigns, and government. So, the data is not freely available, but it is available through data brokers in a much more accessible way than you can get if you go directly to the source, such as the Registrar of Voters Office. So there are private companies that marry your voter data with other data sources and sell that to political campaigns. So there's a whole industry there, and one of the things that bothers me about voter data and how it's used is that it feels very creepy. I mean, people don't realize that the person standing at your door, knocking on your door, has your entire voter history, the names of everybody else living in your household, your birth date, your party affiliation. I mean, all this information about you is provided to political campaigns without your knowledge or consent. And this doesn't happen in other countries. A lot of other countries don't have the kind of voter registration process that we do and don't have this practice of disseminating this data to secondary users. And one of the unfortunate consequences of what's happened in this space is that some of the information that would be really useful for election offices to have, such as voters' phone numbers and email addresses, it's optional to provide on the form, and many voters don't provide it because they don't want political campaigns to contact them on their cell phones or through email, which is totally understandable. But it also means that our elections officials can't contact those voters. So on the issue we're working on, trying to reduce the rejected ballot problem and helping counties to connect with voters to get signatures that are missing or provide a valid signature if their signature was mismatched, the only option is to send them letters. They may try to call some of them or email some of them, but they're missing that data. And so it would be great if we could be more sophisticated in how we utilize this data. For example, we've suggested for a number of years, and Santa Clara County could possibly try this, to say that voters could provide their email address or their phone number for administrative purposes only, and that information would be withheld from secondary users. I know that Orange County withholds that information for their military overseas voters because they know that those voters do not want to be getting political mail on their military email accounts. So this is something that I don't know that this kind of change is going to happen at the statewide level because the political campaigns are the primary users of this data, so it's not in lawmakers' best interest to go out and change the law that restricts their access to them, but it is something that could maybe be initiated and experimented with at the local level, and I would encourage that.
So just a comment on the importance of the secrecy of the ballot. That's something I feel very strongly about and was really frustrated when the legislature signed into law, or the governor signed into law, the selfie bill in 2016 that allows voters now at the polls to basically have your ballot and take a picture and share it on social media how you're voting. And people are doing that more and more. I'm not a fan, but it is something that is occurring. And yes, as Kim said, that as a county elections office who collects data from voters, we are required by law to provide that for election, scholarly, journalistic, political, or other governmental purposes. They do have to come in and fill out a form, show ID, and in our office, we actually post who's buying your data on our website. So you can go to our website and see who's buying your data, and we list the names and what they purchased, the date they purchased it, and what jurisdiction they were purchasing. So it is frustrating, to have to deal with that. There's sometimes that I don't like giving people information. I think there was a case once where there was some federal government, I don't know, some Republican Party folks at the federal level were trying to get voter data on voters, and I refused to give it to them. I actually printed out my voter record, and everything that's highlighted in yellow is confidential according to the government code. So if somebody does call in to get information, they could only get the fact that, yes, we have a name, but they can get your birth date, they can get your political party, but they are not allowed to get anything else over the phone. But if they do come in and fill out a form for those particular purposes, they can have the voter file. We do not give it to them through email. They do only get it on a thumb drive or a CD, so that's the way we do it. And then we also have a form they sign attesting to the fact that it's not going to be used for any purpose that's not authorized. So it has to be used for a specific purpose.
Well, I agree with all those comments. I just want to say that the study that Kim did, although it was done in 2004, it's unfortunately, or whatever, still relevant today. And also, ACM did a study in 2006 of voter registration databases looking at different aspects of them. And there are a number of recommendations in that study, which unfortunately is also still valid today, that are more specific to how these databases are dealt with, such as, for example, that there should be certain fields that should not be easily accessible, especially if they have confidential information, and you should limit the number of people who work inside the election official's office who actually can access this data. So there are things that have to be done at that end too. In terms of privacy, I'm a big fan, despite the stupid selfies, which I don't like, of poll place voting. Because if you go to the polls and you vote, and there's a curtain or whatever it is, nobody can see how you vote. And to me, that's the best way of doing it. Any kind of remote voting, and I know that people are big fans of mail ballots, but any kind of remote voting, you run the risk of voter coercion, vote buying and selling, and of course, another aspect, which in addition to the signature on the envelope, that voters sometimes make mistakes on their ballots. They might appear to overvote, namely voting twice for like president when you can vote only once. If you did that at the poll and then put your ballot into the scanner at the poll, it would catch it, and you would be given the opportunity of getting a new ballot. But if you do it from home and you send it in, there's a good chance you won't get an opportunity to revote because there may not be time or the registrar may not send it back to you. And then one other quick comment I just want to add about these scanners at the polls. The reason that post-election ballot audits are important is that even when we have paper ballots, they are counted by computers. These scanners are computers. And because they are computers, they have all the vulnerabilities of computers, and therefore they need to be checked. So that's why we need to do post-election ballot audits.
Can I add one other comment about the voter registration databases? It is worth noting that in 2016, that was the element of the election process that was vulnerable and was penetrated by foreign adversaries in Arizona, in Illinois, and also in Florida. So I think there's been much greater awareness about the risks there. Like, while we didn't have any evidence that any voting systems were penetrated, there was evidence that the voter registration databases were penetrated. And so I think a lot of election officials have worked very hard with the Department of Homeland Security to strengthen the protection of those systems, which is important because even though you couldn't change votes through that, you could change somebody's address, for example, potentially, or change their party affiliation, then that could impact whether they're able to vote or not. And you could do that in a strategic way that might impact people in a particular geographic area where you're trying to suppress the vote. So it is unfortunate that it happened in 2016, but I do think that there's been a lot of security improvements since then.
So I'm going to stay with privacy and skip around a little bit. We hit some really good points on that, and I've run into some of these too. I've done get out the vote efforts. People complain, how come I'm getting all these robocalls from candidates? I'm on the FTC's do not call list. And the understanding that just because you're on the FTC's do not call list does not affect nonprofits and political campaigns is very slow to get to people. And when they get to that, they then say, well, how did my phone number get out? And the idea that their phone number that they provided when they registered to vote could be that vector is really troubling to people. So we're not going to change the federal, but if we can change the state, that would be really good work. I did run into with Do Not Track, and Do Not Track is dead, long live Do Not Track. It's still a thing we're working on, which would limit, or at least give people the ability to limit some of how data is collected and used about them online, broadly. And I had congressional staff members ask me, like, if my boss supports do not track, won't the DNC be angry? Won't that limit the data that we're able to get for our donors, for get out the vote? And I had to say, honestly, yeah, it will. And so that's really difficult when you want somebody to vote for something that's against their interests, as you brought up. And the other point Mike made, in terms of your friends' settings on Facebook were able to let Cambridge Analytica come grab your data even if you had your account locked down. Think of that from an analogy here of the information that you have going out into the world is also being used to target other voters. It's not just that it comes back against you, it comes back against other people in your community. So that makes this all really complicated and messy. So I want to go back to last year we talked about the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and that just went into effect, and we start to have new teeth to that in June. So we're starting to see a little bit about CCPA rollout. My question for the panelists is, in the short term, do you think that this has any effect for 2020 elections, and then 4 years from now? Do you think that it's likely to have an effect? And I'll go with just short answer, big effect, small effect, you know, and then why, which will go a little longer. I'll start with Mike.
So yes, I think it will have an impact, but I don't necessarily know that we know the gravity of that impact because the law is so new. It just went into effect January 1st. There's still regulations that are being developed on it that the California State Attorney General is working through now. And so we just don't quite know enough. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. And of course, companies are going to say, well, we need some time to respond while an election is taking place, if you think about it. And so I think it's going to be very difficult this election cycle to see much traction, although the law is in effect. So it'll be interesting to see that if people's data is breached, and they decide to, go forward and execute their privacy rights under the CCPA, what will that look like in the courts? And we just don't quite know that yet. I do think in 2024 it is going to have more of an impact. And it'll be interesting to see how these data aggregators, who could certainly fall within scope of it, they collect data on more than 50,000 people, or they make more than $25 million, and they fall within the scope of the CCPA. And if en masse people say, I don't want you to sell my information, I would like for my data, my profile to be removed, what does that mean for their business model? All of a sudden it dissipates. And so there's going to be, I think, significant pushback on that because their whole concept and their business survival depends on selling data. And so when that's lost or when that's threatened, I think we're going to see a lot more pushback between now and 2024 as more cases move forward.
I think the big question is what Mike said. How are the data brokers going to be treated? They live in this gray area. On the one hand, they're selling data to political campaigns. They're not selling it to anyone on the street. So they say they're working in California under the parameters of our voter data dissemination restrictions. But whether that would meet this law, I don't know. So there may need to be some test cases to see how that's going to go. I'd be interested to watch that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's too early to tell in a lot of those cases. I do know the CCPA does not pertain to government agencies, so it's not going to impact my office, but how it's going to impact voter information and the selling of it is going to be interesting to see. I do think it's a step in the right direction, so I think we're moving the right way.
Not being a lawyer and not having read the bill, I have a question about it. So. As I said earlier, I'm very concerned about internet voting, which, by the way, is also a serious privacy issue in terms of protecting the ballot. And there's a company called Votes, which is doing blockchain voting, and they've commissioned with a company in Palo Alto called Jumio. And Jumio is collecting biometric information from the voters' phones to authenticate them. And in their contract, they say, this is our information, you can't have it, you can't control it. And so my question is, would this new law prohibit such contracts? And I don't know the answer, and I haven't had a chance to speak with anyone who might, but this is something which I find very interesting, the ways in which this could actually interact with some of these internet voting systems.
Fantastic. So I'm going to do one more question on law. I know you probably have questions too, so I'm going to prep you. If you have thoughts, we're going to be moving to audience questions fairly soon. But let me do one more question. What do you see as the effect of the Voters' Choice Act, the VCA, on future elections? And before I come to you on that, I'll give you just a little bit of idea of what we might be looking at for the impact of CCPA, of the law we've just been talking about. When Do Not Track was built into web browsers, and in some ways did a lot less, right? It was like putting a doorknob hanger on your hotel room. It didn't actually have a technical effect. It asked companies to please honor your Do Not Track signal. 17% of users turned it on immediately, without any advertising campaign, without any big push. So I think if people start to understand what their CCPA rights are, and there's a lot of uncertainty, if you could imagine that's not going to be a straight up 17% sample, it's going to skew toward different populations, right? So we may in fact see effects for voting in very interesting ways, and I have no idea what that's going to look like. But now that I've given you a chance to go find your notes on VCA, how do you think the Voters' Choice Act will affect future elections? And I'll start down with Barbara and then move forward. Nope, you're going to pass. Okay. You're not a lawyer. Yeah, you're going to pass. So, Gail?
So I just want to give a huge shout out to this new electorate study. If you haven't heard about that, this is amazing. They did a lot of data collection on the VCA counties that first launched in 2016 and compared turnout. And their conclusion was, which is good, that they are seeing a greater turnout among those VCA counties who are basically setting a vote by mail ballot out to everybody and setting up these vote centers 10 days prior to the election. And so now in 2020, we've got 15 counties that are going with the Voters' Choice Act, and Santa Clara being one of them. And and they represent more than half of the state's population. So we're going to get a lot of good data coming out of this election cycle. Santa Cruz County, we're kind of like dipping our toes in the pool on voters' choice. We're operating same day or early vote center satellite offices on the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday before the election at 10 different locations, just getting voters starting to get used to the idea of those vote centers. And in our county, with 161,000 registered voters, we have 111,000 that are permanent vote by mail. So good majority of our people do like to vote by mail. So we will be transitioning to this in 2022.
Yeah, I'm making note of that. This is a good question. I live in Sacramento County. We were one of the 5 pilot counties that rolled out the Voters' Choice Act in 2018, and I was really involved in that. It's a mixed result. There were some things that were improved, others that were more challenging. I mentioned this increase in ballots being rejected. I think that the big change that we have when we shift to using vote by mail ballots, and I want to make sure we understand there's a difference between voting by mail and using vote by mail ballots. Voting by mail means you send your ballot through the U.S. Postal Service, which I actually don't recommend that you do if you can avoid it. It is way better to deliver your ballot in person to a drop box or to a vote center, because the leading reason why ballots get rejected is because they arrive too late. And the only ballots that arrive too late are ballots that are sent through the U.S. Postal Service. So if we want to reduce ballot rejection, a good way to do that is to not use the Postal Service. It's a great tool, and your postage is paid for, but you will save everybody time if you can get your ballot in directly. We also want people to vote early. Voting early is a big change for voters. We have these vote centers open over 11 days, and the election officials really want to get people into them on the earlier side of it, so there's not such a huge crunch on election day and long lines. So you see this shift in messaging. Another reason to vote early is if there is a problem with your signature, if you forgot to sign or it doesn't match, that gives your elections office time to contact you and ask you to get in a signature so your ballot can be counted and not rejected. So another reason to vote early. People just don't realize that signature on the envelope is the election security measure. It is what hinges all election security on now in this vote-by-mail balloting system. You used to go to a polling place, sign the poll roster, you signed under penalty of perjury, but your signature was not checked against your signature on file. Now, when you vote, your signature on your envelope is checked against your signature on file. That means the signature on your voter registration form, or if you voted, if you registered online, it's your signature on your driver's license or your state ID. You may not remember what your signature looks like. So the tip to take away and to tell all the voters in your county before they sign that envelope, take a look at your driver's license and look at what the signature looks like on there and try to make it look the same so that you know it's going to get verified. The other thing that we see happening increasingly with this increase in vote by mail is people signing other people's ballots. Now, this is not people trying to commit election fraud. It's people signing for their own family members. And you see these ballots come in. The election officials can tell because they have the spouse's signatures on file that the parent went and signed their child's envelope or they sign their spouse's envelopes. Those ballots are going to get challenged and rejected if a valid signature is not provided. So you're not doing anybody any favors with that. Another big change that's happening because of this expansion with vote by mail is third-party ballot return, also called ballot harvesting by people who are critical of it. This is where you can allow anybody to turn in your ballot for you, which is a great advantage if you have a roommate or somebody, a coworker that you can entrust with your ballot. But it does raise some fears and concerns that maybe people are going door to door and pressuring people to give them their ballot. So it's important to get the message out that while you have the right to have somebody else turn in your ballot for you, you also have the right to refuse to have somebody else turn in your ballot for you. And we really want voters to exercise that right if they're not comfortable. So another change that's been happening with the advancement of the Voters' Choice Act is we increasingly have lookup tools online that you can go to and check your registration status, check your vote by mail status, make sure you're registered with the party that you want to be registered with when you vote for president. There are all these online tools that we didn't have, 4 years ago that I think can really help voters successfully vote in this new environment.
Great.
Sure, and I think an important aspect of VCA and also what you mentioned about dropping even your mail-in ballots to a vote center, I think is good. I think the challenge with that is that vote centers are going to be perhaps new locations than previous polling places. And so our concern, and really to get out there and let the public know sort of what the new process is that our concern is that you may have people that have voted at the same location in their neighborhood for 20 years. And now all of a sudden it may be a different vote center location and that they can do it anywhere. And so it's explaining that so people don't show up, say, on election day at a location where their ballot can't be counted. Or, for example, that polling place no longer exists because the vote stations are in different locations. So I think messaging that is very important. I could say, our county is going to have 400 events to public outreach and really to try to get out the word to say, this is the new process. You can go anywhere in the county and go to any vote center, and it will print off the ballot for your jurisdiction. And I think that's going to be important to explain, as well as some of the security measures of the systems themselves, that they are locked systems. When you go and have your ballot printed off, there's not internet access to those particular systems. And so I think providing that may offer a little bit of extra reassurance to people to make them believe that when they vote, that their vote is going to be counted correctly.
So Barbara, I see you. What I'm going to ask is for the audience, please have your questions ready. And I'm going to give all panelists, starting with Barbara, a very brief time for final thoughts. And we're going to go to questions.
Can I just answer that other question first?
And your final thoughts, and we're going to move on.
All right. So I realize that this is something that people may not agree with, but I'm really not a fan of vote by mail, as I said earlier. And we know of cases of election theft with vote by mail, most notably in North Carolina in 2016, when somebody was going around collecting ballots, as Kim described, and voting them for a particular candidate. That's why I'm a big fan of polling place voting, where nobody can force you to vote a certain way or buy your ballot, buy your vote. And I am a little concerned about the locality. I like walking to my polling place to vote, and if polling places, so if we have these vote centers, my vote center may not be walking distance. I don't really know where it is at this point. Well, it could be, but anyway. Okay, so my closing comment. I hope somebody will ask me about blockchain voting. I am very concerned about that because it's the new buzzword, blockchain this, blockchain that, blockchain voting. And it's important for people to understand that blockchain voting is internet voting, and it comes with all of the security risks of internet voting. And at a time when the intelligence communities, and including from the current administration, are warning us that our election is going to be attacked by foreign adversaries, the idea that anybody would want to do internet voting, which is the most vulnerable kind of voting we can have, I find pretty astounding, really. And one other quick final comment, there's no evidence that internet voting increases voter participation in general or participation by young people in particular.
Great points. Okay, Gail.
So I think we all need to be careful, and we need to be critical thinkers. And the internet is being used as a weapon, and so we can't just trust everything we see. There's misinformation being put out, just bad information that may be spread just because people see something and they believe it to be so. And then you have people actually trying to create division and putting out disinformation that's just false, and they know it's false, and they're just trying to stir things up. So we need to have a critical mind, and we need to check the source, and we need to see who else is reporting this, and we need to look for false images. And when it comes to voting, we just what I tell my voters is make a plan to vote. Do a democracy checkup. Make sure you're registered the way you need to be registered to vote the ballot that you want to vote. And then make a plan. Are you voting early? Are you voting by mail? Are you going to be going to the polls? Are you going to go on the weekend? Whatever it is, make a plan and know that if you're going to be showing up on election day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and needing to re-register, there might be a line and it might take more time. So if you do vote early, you're less likely to encounter lines. But just get out and vote.
Gail covered two of my last talking points, so I'll just endorse the have a plan. And I want to suggest a date, February 25th. That's 1 week before the election. Put it on your calendars now, and that'll remind you to vote. Get ready to vote. In terms of spotting fake news and avoiding spreading it, I learned this good little tip, which is called SIFT, which stands for stop, meaning don't react immediately. That's part of the manipulation attempt, is to get you to react. So don't immediate react, stop. Investigate the source, find trusted coverage that corroborates what's being claimed, and trace the information, check for a link or validation. So that's the SIFT method. I'm going to try to use that myself. And the way to also counter fake news is get together with people you trust. Have an election ballot party at your house, or have it with your coworkers. Pick a date, do it in your lunchroom. You can assign particular contests to individuals to research and study up on. Even if you don't agree with folks, if you know what their perspective is, it can be very enlightening to hear their opinions about things. So consider putting together an election house party. Have a bottle of wine, some snacks. It can be a really fun time to make the process of getting ready to vote a little bit more fun. And then the last thing I want to just alert voters here particularly to, and this goes back to the Voters' Choice Act, one of the changes that's come is that we are having new voting equipment being implemented. A lot of these are what's called ballot marking devices. There's been a lot of discussion about how these devices work. And so one of the things that we've learned recently is that voters tend to not look at the ballot that's produced from these ballot marking devices. So I want to urge you, if you do vote at a vote center and use this technology to vote, make sure that you are reviewing that ballot and that it does accurately reflect your choices. As I mentioned earlier, the burden of getting it right when we vote is shifted from the poll workers to the voters, and this is another way that when you use technology to vote, it's your job as the voter to make sure the technology captured your choices correctly on that piece of paper that does stand as your ballot and could be used in the post-election audit process that Barbara was describing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mike, really quickly.
Yeah, and I would have to say that the misinformation, disinformation argument is very important. Misinformation is when someone unintentionally spreads false news. For example, someone resends an article that they received, or they send a retweet without looking to see if it's a verified source. And I think we're going to see more of that. But in addition to that, I would also have to say the continued use of social media bots, I think, is going to be a big issue that actually elevate the search results or elevate a tweet to make it look like it's valid. And so I think understanding what are those telltale signs to be able to identify that so people don't get duped is going to be very important. I think in the future, what's going to be interesting is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning combined with big data and how companies and candidates are going to try to micro-targeting, if that's a word right now, but perhaps it will be in the future. But I think that's going to be one of the fascinating aspects going forward.
Thank you. So I'll leave you with my last thoughts, and then we'll do questions really quickly. Use your rights. We have CCPA. We have the California Consumer Privacy Act. It doesn't just protect you from having your data not being sold, it protects your fellow citizens from not having them being targeted with your data. And the other really important right to use is vote. So I'd love to hear your questions. If you could identify one panelist. First hand I saw was up front here in the red, and then we'll go on back. Yes, there's a mic right behind you. Oh, sorry, right coming to you. Yep.
Yes, Alice Smith, National Voter Corps. Our group is also very interested in privacy and the census and the accuracy of the census, since it's going to be mostly electronic. We're very fearful because the impact of the census on voting rights is huge. Because, of course, you get your number of Congress people and you get your the ability for the Electoral College. So I was surprised this was not added to your panel.
Could you, is there one person who'd like to respond to that?
I can.
Yeah.
Sure. So we actually here at the county, just to let you know, we had a huge Census 2020 project, which really went out there to try to make sure that all those underrepresented folks that are in our county are represented, are counted. And so we had a huge effort to get out there and to explain to people the importance of being counted, both for representation in Congress as well as federal funding. And so it's not that it isn't an important issue, but certainly one that we as a county very much believe in. And we've had several public outreach efforts to let people know the importance of responding to the census. We also have educational information to provide people with knowledge and with awareness on where to go to if they need assistance, whether that's filling out the actual census form, understanding how the unique ID works in order to log in for themselves and fill it out online, since 80% are conducted that way this time. And also just about some of the concerns with, I know there's a question on there about immigration, which is now no longer there, but nonetheless, it still rose concerns to the immigrant community. And so for our part of it, we've taken extra efforts to try to inform our community of what we're doing to try to make sure that they feel comfortable and confident that they can come out, respond to the census, and know that they can do so safely.
Thank you for the question. We're going to go to the back here, and if you could identify one panelist you'd like to answer. Barbara, do you want to take that? If not, I actually have.
Well, I actually don't have an answer for you, but I just thought I would expand a little bit on the Jumio thing. One of the reasons why they're collecting biometric information is that a lot of other data, such as you're talking about, name, social security number, birth date, all kinds of data is publicly available, at least on the dark net, and it's just not reliable. So that's one of the reasons why internet voting vendors are resorting to using biometrics, among other things.
Can someone talk to what the county is doing and perhaps state level as well?
I wondered I don't want to put her on the spot, but I know Shannon's here, or maybe Mike has some information about what's going on and how the county is securing this information.
Sure. So our election systems have gone through NIST certified information security evaluations, and so NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they have a cybersecurity framework that's designed primarily for federal government information systems, but is also applied at state, local, and commercial enterprises. And so our county has gone through that process of looking at our voting system, conducting those assessments, and making sure that risks were within acceptable parameters.
So
I think it's also important to note that they're not connected to the internet at all, and that we do logic and accuracy testing of the equipment before it goes out. When it comes back, we also do all the audits and hand counts to make sure that the vote is correct.
So if you want to read more, and I'll take the next question, look for Professor Ed Felton's papers from Princeton. He literally had a voter machine, a voting machine handed to a grad student in a back alley. Fun stuff to read. Question here in plaid toward the front, and then behind, we'll come to you second. And then we may be out of time.
Ballot marking devices that use barcodes cannot be checked by a voter because what's read by the machine is the barcode, not what's printed out above the barcode. This, I think, is a real problem in Los Angeles. But my question about primary question is why were e-polling systems not part of the discussion today?
So I think just to stop right, we've had a couple of why didn't you talk about this issue, right, starting with the census. Fundamentally, this is big and vast, and I think trying to get our head wrapped around all of it in one session is not going to happen. But maybe somebody can describe how some of those points raised, which were good ones, are being addressed. And Barbara, do you want to take that? I think you can't get all three. If you can get one, you're doing well.
Well, I'll take the last one about the barcode for start. It's true what you're saying about Los Angeles. One of the issues is that while the voter cannot necessarily validate the barcode, the ballots in general with these systems, and I'm not talking about Los Angeles in particular, have the printed names of what the voter has voted on. And if you have a post-election ballot audit, that should check what the human readable portion of the ballot is, not the barcode. So if you do a post-election ballot audit of the ballot and you use the human readable portion for the audit, then it doesn't matter if the barcode lied. You'll catch it.
Regarding the late ballot issue, there is a law called Postmark +3. If your ballot's postmarked by Election Day and received within 3 business days, it will get counted. The problem is that sometimes people will put their ballots into a mailbox on the street that's already had the mail picked up out of it, and they got them in after that pickup time. And so we did a study of Sacramento's ballots that were late, and almost all of them, I think 77%, were postmarked on the day after the election. So either people return them the too late, or they put them in a box too late. But there is a 3-day grace period. We're still seeing late ballots despite that.
And on the VoCal issue, I could say that our voter registration network to the Secretary of State's office is isolated, and we have sophisticated endpoint protections on our servers and workstations. So VoCal has one pipe to the Secretary of State's office, and the data is encrypted. And we have next-generation firewalls and security appliances deployed throughout the network, which have they can block any known threats and provide real-time reporting of suspicious or abnormal behavior on the elections IT infrastructure. And our IT department is watching that constantly. So,
And I would also like to add that our county is part of the Election Infrastructure ISAC with the Department of Homeland Security, which provides vulnerability feeds directly to the county. We also have other vendors that we work with for the defense in-depth solutions that we have, where we also get feeds about threats, cybersecurity or otherwise, coming into the county.
And we also all know that even air-gapped systems are not secure, right? So these are great steps, but let's take the final question, I think, from the woman implied here. If we go quickly, I'll come to you in Mauve and back. Let's see how we do on time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think maybe Barbara first, and then we'll get into issues of training poll workers.
So thank you for that comment, because obviously I wasn't clear. What I should have said was I'm not opposed to vote by mail for people who need it. I'm opposed, what I'm not happy about is this move to try to encourage almost everybody to vote by mail. That's the part that I'm not and so I really thank you for raising that. Just one other very quick comment. You talk about elderly people needing that option, and I agree with you. But to tell you a story on the other side of it, Oregon, I think, I think it was in Oregon, they have vote by mail for everybody, or at least they did when I was there. And this woman told me about how her father, who has Alzheimer's, had voted. He was at a home, and she was quite confident that someone voted for him.
I'm going to let you guys take that offline. Thank you. Kim, do you want to respond to the training side?
Yeah. On the training side, I mean, one of the reasons why some counties have moved to the Voters' Choice Act model is because it does allow them to do more intensive training and have a more professionalization element of the election workers. So, instead of working one 16-hour day for $100 or something like that, people are actually employees of the county on a temporary basis and are trained to work at a vote center over an 11-day period or a 4-day period, and they're able to get, more training and more familiarity with the equipment and the procedures. So the hope is that that will allow there to be a more smooth experience for the people who are working behind the counter and for the voters on the other side of the counter. And I did see that in my own county in Sacramento where we went through this transition. Regarding your other statement about lack of awareness. I mean, it's very challenging, I know, to get the word out about something like this. The law does require the county to send a minimum of 2 mailings, 2 postcards to every registered voter. So they should have gone out or will be going out. Plus, everybody will get their voter information guide. I know there's a lot of anticipation about this election, and I appreciate any help folks here can provide to help let people know about these changes coming, which is why I hope that you will make sure you take some of the promotional material that the county was able to provide and put it up in your workplaces.
Sure, and some of that material is in the takeaway bags that each of you have and outside by the registration.
Just to encourage everyone here to, if you work in a county that needs volunteers to serve in the polls or vote centers, please volunteer. We need you.
And how do we do that?
Super easy. Just call your registrar's office, or in our case, we have a link on our website. So I'm sure Santa Clara has the same thing. So you could either, or just send an email, just let us know, and we will definitely find a place for you.
We certainly do, and you can look in your takeaway bags and go directly to the ROV website or talk to one of our staff members about that here today.
Fantastic. That's a great note to end on. I love how much passion there is in this room. This is a fantastic event. Thank you for holding it. I think we could continue to have lots of other discussions on this and should, right? I mean, what could be more vital to democracy than this conversation? So I will let you move to the next part of the program. Thank you all very much for your questions.
All right.
And a huge thank you to our very knowledgeable and amazingly awesome panelists. Thank you all for it.
All right, thank you, Alicia, and thank you to all of our panelists. Right now, I'd like to welcome Supervisor Joe Simidian, who will be offering closing remarks today. Supervisor Simidian brings a wide range of perspectives and backgrounds to his work and has served at 5 levels of state and local government. In addition to serving as a member of the Board of Supervisors, he is also the chair of the Health and Hospital Committee and vice chair of the Housing, Land Use, and Transportation Committee. His legislative record related to privacy is well known by those in the field, such as California's data breach notification law and online privacy protection law. He has a long history in privacy and certainly in elections, which I hope will share with us today. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Supervisor Joe Simidian.
Yes, if you saw me double take, it's because I wanted to say to my friend Gail, that's my seat, please don't get too attached to it, okay? Thank you all very much. You know, all of you got here this morning, and thank you for that, by different routes, different paths. And what I wanted to share with you, or at least begin my remarks with, is letting you know how I got here. And quite literally, I actually got here on a path that began more than 25 years ago. Now, we are going to wrap up on time, so don't get nervous about the fact that that was a 25-year path. But 25 years ago, a little more actually, in the spring of 1994, I was in El Salvador. And I remember the evening very well because it was a warm Saturday night in the spring of '94, and I was sipping a club soda at an American Embassy cocktail party. And the reason I was there is because I was one of 16 members of the White House delegation to observe elections in El Salvador. And at the time, I remember I was struggling, frankly, as you can imagine, you know, you've flown in, you're out of your element, and I'm trying desperately to make small talk with this group of folks out on the patio and make sure that I don't get crosswise with anyone in terms of the politics in El Salvador. And actually, the conversation is pretty polite and frankly seems mundane until I realize, as I'm standing there with my club soda, that something really quite extraordinary was happening in that moment. I was talking with a fellow named Jose Napoleon Duarte Jr. And Jose Napoleon Duarte Jr. was the son of the former Salvadoran president. And Duarte Jr. was himself a candidate for mayor in the capital city of San Salvador. And as we're chatting, I realized that we're also talking with a fellow by the name of Joaquin Villalobos. And Joaquin Villalobos is formerly a top-ranking FMLN comandante who has led the guerrilla troops in a 12-year war against the government that had been led by Duarte Sr. at a cost of roughly 75,000 lives. And all of this is just a little more than a year after the end of the war. And so, as I say, I think under any set of circumstances, this would be an extraordinary conversation between the candidate Duarte Jr., son of Duarte Sr., the former president of the country, and the comandante who has been leading guerrillas in the field. But then it dawns on me that it's an even more extraordinary conversation because former Comandante Villalobos was widely believed to have played a role in the kidnapping of Duarte Jr.'s sister during the time of the Civil War. So I've got Duarte Jr., the candidate, and Villalobos, the former Comandante, and there's a very quiet, sort of mysterious young woman standing with the Comandante as we all sip our drinks. And we're chatting amiably, and we're making small talk, and even an occasional joke. And it sort of comes very clear to me, I'm standing with the kidnapping Comandante and his victim's brother. And I'm thinking in that moment, on the embassy patio, that the democratic process is really quite an extraordinary thing. And that the elections I was about to observe on behalf of the White House are all the more remarkable under those circumstances. That was 1994. Now, fast forward a little, 3.5 years later, I get a phone call from a friend, a contact in the US State Department. He remembers that I had been part of that White House delegation and says, hey, there's an opportunity to help supervise elections in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the ethnic cleansing has just finally abated. And he wonders if I might be interested, and I say I am. And at the time, I was a member of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors during an earlier stint, which was becoming, at that time, the home to literally thousands of Bosnian refugees. So I say yes, and I end up as one of roughly 400 Americans who are chosen by the State Department, seconded, which is a fancy State Department word for passed along, to a group called OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And off I go to an undisclosed location, as it continues to be described, somewhere in Bosnia. I end up in a small mountain town called, in the central Vrbas region, Bogojno, and along with roughly 60 others in my cohort, were trained very quickly but very efficiently by troops who are stationed there on matters of security and safety. And my job will be to supervise one polling place as the country goes to vote on election day. Now, I should tell you these two experiences were remarkably different. As a member of the White House delegation, I was the lowest ranking member, by the way, by any measure of that delegation, which actually worked out pretty well because no one really understood what it was when they met someone who was with the UN Truth Commission on El Salvador or with Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. But I was the vice mayor of Palo Alto, a good Spanish name, and everybody knew what the alcalde was, so they knew I was sort of a second banana alcalde, and they could relate to that. But mostly our job was to communicate the message in El Salvador that we were there on behalf of the US government to ensure free and fair elections. When I was asked to actually help supervise elections, it was the other end of the continuum, ground level, ground truth, in the polling place, helping to supervise on the 2 days when elections were held. And in fact, I remember the fellow who called me from the State Department to ask if I would like to take the assignment in Bosnia made it sound absolutely unappealing. And was pretty negative from start to finish. And then it dawned on me, I remember I was up on the 10th floor when I took the call, I said, Tony, you know, just because I'm an elected official doesn't mean I don't know how to do real work. And he sort of chuckled and said, well, you know, I know you had this experience as a member of the White House delegation. This is going to be a little bit more shirt sleeves rolled up. And I said, that's exactly what I'm looking to do. So there I was in central Bosnia, in the immediate aftermath of the ethnic cleansing. The reason for the security training is that we have minefields and unexploded ordnance, which I should say, you know, local folks have learned to live with and just go about their business. The sense of humor is dark. People keep telling the same bad joke about the fact that at the time Bosnia is known to have more three-legged cows than any other country in the world. Yeah, I'm not sharing this with my wife, who's back home at this point. And we end up spending 2 days in the polling place in a schoolhouse, which felt very familiar to me as someone who had been part of the American electoral process. And it's the only time I've been in a polling place where there was a big international stop sign with a slash through it, except it said international stop sign slash no handguns. And right next to it was the international stop sign for no cigarettes. Now, I had asked our trainers about the challenge of working with local election officials who would be assigned to the polling place in Bosnia, when we were told that they were in charge, but that we were to supervise. And I said, how do we supervise when we are in charge? And we had a, ironically, Swiss trainer who said, flexibility is key. So, sure enough, one of the local officials, 5 minutes in, pulls out a pack of cigarettes and starts to light up. And now, of course, my authority is being challenged. And I have a decision to make in the moment as we are about to commence 2 days of elections. And everyone looks at me, the half dozen folks in the room. And the chair pretends to ask, do you have any objection to my smoking, says he, under the international sign for no smoking. And I made a snap judgment that 2 days alone in the polling place with a bunch of nicotine-deprived election officials would not go well for any of us. And so I told him I had no objection, but that if things got out of hand, the cigar smokers might retaliate. And he smiled, proceeded to take out his pack of cigarettes, and that, of course, provided the freedom for everyone else in the room to take out their cigarettes and puff, puff, puff away during the course of the next 2 days. I am pleased to tell you that as people made their way past the unexploded ordnance, past the minefields, past the tank parked in the city square, that the cigarette smoke was the greatest risk to all of us, quite frankly, during the course of those 2 days. And in spite of those obstacles, 93% of the eligible voters made their way to the polling place during rainy weather, often from far afield, to cast their votes in that first election following the ethnic cleansing that had taken place. In a town where just prior to the election, Bosnian Muslims had been forced out of their homes and returned to find that local ethnic Croats had planted explosive devices that were designed to keep them from reclaiming their homes and their businesses. You cannot help but be moved in those moments, just as in El Salvador a few years earlier, you could not help but be moved by people who walked literally miles and miles and miles down out of the hills in 100-degree temperatures to cast their vote. So while I am genuinely appreciative of all of the expertise that has been brought to bear on this conversation today, what I wanted to do was take a moment and reflect on the fact that confidence in the integrity of our elections is the necessary precondition for a functioning democracy. And that an attempt, any attempt, to undermine confidence in our elections is an attempt to undermine our democracy itself. So whatever any one of you and each and all of you are doing to ensure that as we conduct our elections, people have confidence in our process, I say thank you to you. Even if it is only that you found a path that brought you to this room to have this conversation today. Because I don't need to tell any of you, we are at a time in American political and governmental life when people are questioning the very foundations of our democracy and the integrity of our institutions. And what that means is that it has never been more important that we take the necessary steps to avoid undermining confidence, and that we take the necessary steps to reinforce and help people understand the integrity of the systems that we keep in place. When a registrar has even the smallest of problems, it's front page news. We're here in a county with 2 million people, got 50 different languages. Close to 40% of the folks who live here are foreign-born, which means that close to 70% of the folks who live here live in a household with somebody who's foreign-born. The process may be unfamiliar to them. They may come from countries or cultures that have not given them much confidence in the integrity of our systems, which means that the smallest reason to doubt the integrity of our work, like that, will be grasped upon. It means that even the tiniest bit of misinformation or disinformation can undermine the confidence people have in not just the election, but the elected officials and the institutions that are ultimately the result of those elections. So if it's voters' choice, the mere fact that we have a new system in place will be the basis for confusion. Confusion, of course, creates anxiety. Anxiety, of course, creates suspicion. Suspicion, of course, takes us right back to that bad place we can't be. So we have every obligation to make sure that we roll out this new system in a way that not just assures people, but gives them comfort and confidence that we're doing it in a way that respects their vote. When the results come in a little late, people wonder what's going on. So we have every reason to make sure that we turn those results around as quickly as we possibly can, consistent with ensuring we get the right result. If the race is close, and we have so many smaller communities where races are decided literally by a half dozen votes, then in the absence of a recount or a risk-limiting audit, we can't be surprised. People will say, was that really the right result? Did my vote count? If there's a problem on the website that ultimately has nothing to do with a correct tabulation, we can't be surprised that people are anxious. And if they do decide not to mail their ballots, and they confront what to them will be new equipment, we're going to have to be crystal clear about why that new equipment enhances rather than undermines the integrity of the voting process. we're going to have to not just avoid mistakes, but at every opportunity, be quite purposeful about providing the assurance people need and are entitled to. All of you who have spent 5 minutes online or picked up a newspaper know that there is a great divide in the nation. And that rather than trying to find ways to come together, seek common ground, we've got folks who are ready to think the worst of each other. The way we keep that from happening is by delivering a process that they can be assured is respectful of their point of view, no matter how much it may be anathema to any one of us. So as I said earlier, when you do whatever it is you do, even if it is just being here today, you are an absolutely essential part. You are quite literally helping to preserve our democracy. And for that, I simply wanted to be here to say thank you very much. Thank you all. It's good to see you here today. Thank you. Mike, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Supervisor Simidian, and I wanted to thank our panel again. I think they did an excellent job, and thank all of you for coming out today. I would also like to say that getting out the vote is very important for all of us to make sure that all of you vote and then talk to others about it as well. We do have some material with you today, and as I mentioned, we have some registrar voter staff. If you could stand up, please, just identify yourselves. They're making themselves available after this discussion. If you have any questions, they're here for you. We also have our privacy staff that are here as well. Some of them have gone around with the microphones and at the registration tables. So please feel free to reach out to them. Also, we have our Privacy Office website where we have privacy tips in protecting consumer privacy, voting privacy, and so on. Also, the Registrar of Voters website, please go there as well for voting information and elections information, especially considering the new system that we're going through this year. So again, thanks everyone for coming. Lunch is over here to your right. Please feel free to join us, free lunch. So by all means, please do, and stay around for the conversation if you can. Thank you very much.